Hi there, everyone. This is Sean, and welcome to Questioning Money, a newsletter taking a closer look at how money works and how it affects the world around us. Today, I'm going to talk about how our system of money is based on debt, and how the economy, as a result, relies on debt in order to function. The reason that our economy relies on debt is because of our inflationary monetary system. When the central bank or the government creates new money, they are effectively reducing the value of the money already circulating. Over time, this results in prices increasing. Now, this is what they want. Central banks and governments want prices to rise because it makes it less painful to take out debt, which we've covered in earlier issues. Why would we want to encourage more debt? The answer is because investment, which usually is done through debt, results in growth. When people invest their money into things like business ideas or scientific research, new advances theoretically happen more frequently. The more people are investing, the more likely it is that there is some major technological achievement or improvement in something like medical efficiency or some other breakthrough. The inflationary monetary system encourages people with businesses to take on new debt to try and create new things. It's important to highlight that the reason this debt loses value over time is because the value of each dollar is losing value over time. This encourages investment and debt even further because if you're just saving your money in the bank, it's losing value from inflation. This system also benefits governments by allowing them to engage in spending that doesn't have to be paid for with taxes. It wasn't like this at first, but we're now in a place where the government needs inflationary money. There hasn't been a budget surplus, meaning when tax revenue exceeds government spending, since 2001, and it would be my bet that there will never be another government surplus again. The reason is that the amount of taxes that would need to be raised in order to compensate for all the spending is so enormous that it would be political suicide to attempt. Taxes would need to be massively raised to the point where just taxing the rich would not nearly be sufficient. The alternative would be massive spending cuts by the government. This is also political suicide and will probably never happen. What is going to happen is that there's going to be more government spending funded by debt and deficits. So it's not just that inflationary money is supposed to encourage regular people to take on debt for investment. Inflationary money is necessary for the government, at least the way the government is today. What all of this has led to is a society that has become completely reliant on being in debt. In the United States today, there's nearly $30 trillion worth of debt, and that number is growing rapidly. The trigger point at which we went from having a regular inflationary monetary system to one that is completely dominated by debt is 1971, when the dollar left the gold standard. At that point, there was no longer a cap to the amount of new money that can be created. Since the US left the gold standard, the money supply of the dollar has gone from about $2 trillion circulating to over $20 trillion. Fundamentally, it's the creation of new money that drives inflation, and in turn drives the amount of new debt. By printing so much new money, we are now encouraging people to invest their money and go into debt more than we've ever had before. The economy has adapted to this in turn. Since you can't store your wealth in dollars anymore, since so much new money is being created, devaluing the dollar, everyone is spending money. They're investing in financial markets and they're taking out debt. It's reached a point where now the economy needs more debt to survive. Over the last 50 years, and really the last 20, the amount of new debt that's accumulated has gone exponential. You can see this in actions such as all of the stock buybacks that you hear companies do. Under a less debt-focused system, companies would just save their money in cash. They can't do this anymore because these companies understand just how much dollars in the bank are getting devalued because of all the inflation and money printing. If a company doesn't have an area of its own business that it wants to invest in, it ends up buying its own stock, because the company wants to keep the money within the company, but they're so heavily penalized if they just keep their money in the bank because of the massive dollar devaluation that's happened over the last 50 years. The problem is that there's no way to roll back all of this debt. It's a product of the system of money. Individuals, businesses, and governments all have more debt than ever before. Since the amount of debt is growing faster than incomes are growing, the debt is getting harder and harder to pay off. As a result, the Federal Reserve and the government only have two choices. Choice one is to stop printing money. Not only would there not be inflation in this scenario, but deflation would actually happen, which means that prices get lower. This is really bad for people who are in debt because it increases the burden of that debt. If we allowed deflation to occur, debts would be defaulted on, banks would fail, and there would be a massive deflationary depression. The Federal Reserve is not going to do that. What they're going to do is option B. They're going to keep printing money because the only way to pay off the increasingly massive amount of debt there is to make the debt worth less by devaluing the currency. Instead of dealing with the debt problem and an economy that cannot survive without ever more debt, the Fed and the government are going to keep kicking the can down the road, meaning that they're going to print an increasing amount of money to help service the existing debt, which in turn is going to create an economy that is even more reliant on debt than it is right now. It's likely not sustainable, but it has prevented a debt depression so far. I am worried that kicking the can down the road is going to make it even worse when the debt bubble eventually pops. To summarize all of this in a neat message, there are three separate debt bubbles in America right now. There's debt on the individual level, the corporate level, and the government level. All three of those sectors have so much debt that is accumulated that there's no real way to pay off the debt. If any one of those three debt bubbles popped, it would lead to a possible depression in the country. So the Federal Reserve and the government are not going to let those bubbles pop. Instead, they're going to keep printing ever-increasing amounts of money, which makes the burden of the existing debt smaller, but it results in even more debt being created over time. Essentially, in order to prevent these debt bubbles from popping, the Fed has to make them even bigger. There's no easy fix here, and it's not going to be fixed. Either the debt bubbles are going to pop soon, and the effects on the economy would be crushing, or the Federal Reserve and the government will keep trying to prevent the bubbles from popping, even though they have no way to actually fix the bubbles. It's obvious that the latter choice has been made, but it remains to be seen exactly what will result of it. So that is how our economy is based on debt, and that concludes this issue of Questioning Money. Thank you all for listening. If you like the newsletter, please subscribe. You can find me on Twitter @SeanCover, and I'll be back next week. Take care, everyone.